The letter trembled in Grace Gallagher's hand, dust from the stagecoach journey still clinging to its edges as she read it for the 100th time since leaving Boston. Seeking a bride of good character and gentle disposition, the advertisement had proclaimed, alongside promises of a comfortable life in the Arizona Territory. Yet here she stood in Apache Junction in the spring of 1881, her trunk at her feet and doubt blooming in her chest, wondering if she'd made the gravest mistake of her 22 years. The town was nothing like she'd imagined during those long nights, dreaming of escape from her uncle's oppressive household. The single dirt road stretched before her, lined with wooden buildings weathered by sun and sand. A saloon, a general store, and what appeared to be a small sheriff's office made up the heart of Apache Junction. In the distance, the Superstition Mountains loomed, mysterious and imposing against the brilliant blue sky. Miss Gallagher. A woman approached, her practical dress and no-nonsense demeanor suggesting she was a person of some authority in the small community. "I'm Martha Wilson, proprietress of the boarding house. I received word you'd be arriving today." Grace straightened her spine, determined not to let her apprehension show. "Yes, thank you for meeting me. I'm to wed Mr. Henderson in 3 days' time." Martha's expression shifted, concern flickering across her weathered features. "Oh, my dear, I'm afraid there's been some confusion. James Henderson passed away 2 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick." The ground seemed to tilt beneath Grace's feet. "But his last letter, I don't understand." The poor man was bedridden when he dictated that final letter to his ranch hand. He took a turn for the worse right after. Martha's voice was gentle but direct. "I'm sorry you've come all this way for nothing." Grace clutched her reticule tighter, mind racing. Her uncle had made it clear she wasn't welcome back, not after she'd defied him by answering the advertisement. She had exactly $8.43 to her name, and no prospects in a town where she knew no one. Is there a return stage tomorrow?" Grace asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Not for another week, I'm afraid." "You're welcome to stay at my boarding house until then, though I should warn you it's $2 a night." Grace did the arithmetic quickly. She couldn't afford to stay a full week and still have money for the return journey. Before she could respond, the sound of spurs jingling against wooden planks drew her attention to the man approaching from the general store. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. A leather vest hung open over his cotton shirt, and a gun belt was secured low on his hips. There was an easy confidence to his movements that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Mrs. Wilson," he greeted, tipping his hat. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin, shifted to Grace with undisguised interest. "This the mail-order bride for old Henderson," Martha nodded. "Lucas Lawson, meet Miss Grace Gallagher. She's just learned the unfortunate news." The man Lucas studied Grace more carefully now, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the distress she was trying so hard to conceal. "That's a mighty long journey to make for nothing, Miss Gallagher." "I'm aware of that, Mr. Lawson," Grace replied, a spark of defiance cutting through her dismay. A hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Got any plans now that your intended is 6 feet under, Lucas?" Martha scolded. "Show some respect," he shrugged, unapologetic. "Just being direct, Mrs. Wilson. No sense dancing around the truth." Grace lifted her chin. "I'll be returning to Boston as soon as possible." "Boston, huh?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Long way back, expensive ticket." "I have means," she lied, unwilling to reveal her desperate circumstances to this stranger. Lucas looked unconvinced. "Well, since you're staying a spell, you should know I'm looking for help at my ranch. My housekeeper just left to care for her daughter in Tucson. Pays fair, works honest. Mr. Lawson, I am not seeking employment as a housekeeper. Never said you were, but a week's wages might make your journey home more comfortable. He tipped his hat again. Think about it. I'm at the Golden Spur until sundown if you change your mind. As he walked away, Martha sighed. Don't mind Lucas. He's rough around the edges, but he's one of the few decent men in these parts. Runs the most successful cattle operation in the county. Grace watched his retreating figure, torn between indignation at his presumption and pragmatic consideration of his offer. I suppose I should secure lodging for tonight at least. Come along then, Martha said kindly. First night's on me. We can figure out the rest tomorrow. The boarding house was simple but clean, with a small room at the back that Martha showed Grace to. After washing the dust from her face and changing into a fresh dress, Grace sat on the edge of the narrow bed, allowing herself a moment of rare vulnerability. Tears slipped down her cheeks as the full weight of her situation pressed upon her. When the tears finally subsided, she found herself contemplating Lucas Lawson's offer. A week of wages would indeed make the difference between returning to Boston with some dignity or arriving destitute, and perhaps the work would keep her mind from dwelling on her predicament. By morning, Grace had made her decision. She found Lucas at the livery stable preparing to return to his ranch. Mr. Lawson, she called, approaching with as much dignity as she could muster. I've considered your offer. He turned, surprise evident in his expression. Have you now? Yes. I will accept the position with conditions. First, I require proper accommodations with privacy. Second, I will work for exactly 1 week, no more. And third, I expect to be treated with respect. Lucas leaned against his horse, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. Anything else, Your Highness? Grace refused to be baited. My compensation will be agreed upon in advance and paid in full at the week's end. A slow smile spread across his face. $3 a day, meals included, your own room in the main house. And you won't find a man on my ranch who will treat you with anything less than proper respect. It was more generous than she'd expected. Then we have an agreement. Seems we do. He extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, she shook it. His palm was calloused but warm against her skin. We leave in an hour. Pack light, it's a rough ride. The journey to the Lawson ranch was indeed challenging. Grace perched uncomfortably on the wagon seat beside Lucas, conscious of every jolt and bump along the rugged trail. The Arizona landscape was alien to her, vast, sun-scorched and dotted with cacti and brush. Yet there was an undeniable beauty to it, a wild majesty that she couldn't help but admire. It's different from Boston, Lucas commented, noticing her wide-eyed gaze. Very, she agreed. Though I find it has its own charm. Most Easterners don't see it that way. They come expecting streets paved with gold or at least something civilized. Instead, they get dust, heat, and danger. Is it dangerous? Grace asked, suddenly more alert. Lucas shrugged. Can be. Apache raids have mostly stopped since they've been forced onto reservations, but there are still outlaws, rattlesnakes, and the land itself can kill you if you don't respect it. He glanced at her. What made you answer an advertisement for a mail-order bride anyway? Grace hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing personal details. Circumstances made remaining in Boston untenable. Circumstances have a way of doing that, he said, not pressing further. As they crested a hill, the Lawson ranch came into view. Grace couldn't suppress a gasp of surprise. It was far more substantial than she'd expected. A large main house built of timber and stone, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and cattle grazing on the surrounding grasslands. This is all yours? She asked. Started with nothing 10 years ago, Lucas replied, a hint of pride in his voice. Built it acre by acre, head by head. It's impressive, Grace admitted. It's home, he said simply. As they pulled up to the house, two ranch hands approached to help with the horses. They nodded respectfully to Grace, curiosity evident in their expressions. "Boys, this is Miss Gallagher. She'll be keeping house for us while Mrs. Diaz is away," Lucas announced. "Miss Gallagher, meet Tom and Caleb." "Madam," they greeted in unison, tipping their hats. "I'll show you to your room," Lucas said, carrying her trunk with ease. Inside, the house was surprisingly well appointed, not luxurious by Boston standards, but comfortable and clean. He led her to a bedroom off the main hallway. "Mrs. Diaz kept things in good order, but she's been gone a week now. The place could use a woman's touch." "I'll begin first thing tomorrow," Grace said, taking in the simple but pleasant room with its brass bed and patchwork quilt. Lucas nodded. "Get settled in. Supper's at 6. Left alone, Grace sank onto the bed, the events of the past 2 days catching up with her. She had come to Arizona to be a bride, only to find herself essentially a servant in a stranger's home. Yet as she unpacked her meager belongings, she couldn't deny a small sense of relief. This arrangement, temporary though it was, gave her purpose and safety while she gathered her resources. The week that followed was one of adjustments and discoveries. Grace threw herself into the work, cleaning, cooking, and bringing order to the ranch house. Though she'd grown up with servants, her uncle's financial mismanagement had forced her to learn domestic skills, which she now put to good use. The ranch hands, 5 in total, were respectful, if a bit awkward around her, clearly unaccustomed to female company at mealtimes. Lucas himself proved to be an enigma. He was up before dawn each day, often returning well after dark, his focus entirely on his ranch. When their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite but distant, as though regretting his impulsive offer of employment. Only at supper did she glimpse another side of him, as he bantered with his men and occasionally shared stories of his early days in the territory. On her 4th day, Grace was hanging laundry when she noticed riders approaching. Her heart quickened as she recognized the badges on their chests, lawmen of some kind. Lucas emerged from the barn, striding to meet them. Though she couldn't hear their conversation, the tension in his posture was unmistakable. After a brief exchange, the lawman departed and Lucas stalked toward the house, his expression thunderous. "Is everything all right?" Grace ventured as he passed. He stopped, seeming to notice her for the first time. "Rustlers hit the Davidson place last night, 2nd ranch this month." "How terrible! Was anyone hurt?" "Not this time," he said grimly. "But they're getting bolder. Sheriff's asking all ranchers to keep extra watch." He rubbed his jaw, a gesture she'd noticed he made when troubled. "Might have to postpone your return to town. Not safe on the roads right now." Grace's stomach tightened. "But our agreement, I know what we agreed," he cut in. "And I'll honor it. But I can't in good conscience send you back with rustlers about. Once they're caught or move on, I'll take you myself." Before she could protest, he continued into the house, leaving her with linens flapping in the breeze and a growing sense of unease. She had exactly $4.21 saved from what she'd brought, nowhere near enough for a ticket back east. Each day delayed was another day closer to destitution. That evening, supper was a tense affair. The men spoke in hushed tones about the rustlers, speculating on their next move and discussing watch rotations. Grace served the meal silently, her own worries making it difficult to focus on the conversation. As the men filed out to begin the night watch, Lucas lingered. "Sorry about today," he said quietly. "Didn't mean to snap at you. You're concerned for your ranch. It's understandable." He studied her for a moment. "You're not what I expected, Grace Gallagher." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. What did you expect? Someone softer, more prone to hysterics. His mouth quirked in a half-smile. Instead, you're as steady as any man on my crew. Necessity teaches adaptation, Mr. Lawson. Lucas, he corrected. If you're staying longer than planned, we might as well dispense with formalities. Am I staying longer? She challenged. Or are you simply assuming I have no choice in the matter? His expression sobered. You always have a choice, but I'd rest easier knowing you were safe here than worrying about you on the road or back in that town with no prospects. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. I appreciate your concern, but I can't impose indefinitely. It's not an imposition when the work is needed and fairly compensated. He hesitated. In fact, I'd be willing to increase your wages if you'd consider staying on until Mrs. Diaz returns. Could be another month or more. Grace weighed his offer against her dwindling options. A month of increased wages would give her enough for the ticket home and perhaps a small cushion besides. I'll consider it, she said finally. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with that. Good night then, Grace. Good night, Lucas. After he left, Grace remained at the kitchen table, troubled by her conflicted feelings. She'd come west seeking security through marriage, only to find herself in an entirely different arrangement. Yet she couldn't deny there was something appealing about earning her own way, about being valued for her skills rather than as a potential wife. The next morning dawned with an eerie stillness. Grace rose early to prepare breakfast for the men coming off night watch, but as she moved about the kitchen, an inexplicable sense of foreboding settled over her. She was just taking biscuits from the oven when a shot rang out, followed by shouting. Heart pounding, she rushed to the window. In the gray light of dawn, she could make out figures on horseback approaching the corrals, guns drawn. Behind her, boots pounded down the hallway as Lucas emerged, rifle in hand. Get away from the windows, he ordered, his voice taut. Stay inside no matter what you hear. Lucas, what's happening? Rustlers, he said grimly. They're after the horses, not the cattle, more valuable, easier to move. He checked his ammunition. Bolt the door behind me. Before she could respond, he was gone. Grace watched through a crack in the curtains as Lucas joined his men, taking cover behind the water trough. The rustlers, she counted 5, had already reached the corral and were attempting to drive the horses out. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks splitting the morning quiet. One of the ranch hands fell, clutching his shoulder. Without thinking, Grace grabbed a clean tablecloth and the bottle of whiskey Lucas kept in the cupboard. Ignoring his instructions, she slipped out the back door and made her way to the wounded man, keeping low. Miss Gallagher. He gasped when she reached him. It was young Caleb, barely 20 by her estimation. You shouldn't be out here. Hush now, she said, tearing the cloth into strips. The bullet had gone through his shoulder, leaving an ugly but clean wound. Press this against it hard. More shots rang out, closer now. Grace looked up to see Lucas engaged with one of the rustlers, their struggle bringing them dangerously near her position. The rustler, a burly man with a wild beard, spotted her and grinned maliciously. Well, what have we here? He leered, changing direction toward her. Lucas's face transformed with fury. She's mine, he roared, launching himself at the man with renewed vigor. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and dust, but Lucas quickly gained the upper hand, delivering a punishing blow that left the rustler senseless. The tide of the battle turned quickly after that. 2 rustlers lay dead, 1 wounded, and the remaining 2 surrendered when they found themselves outgunned. As the ranch hands secured the prisoners, Lucas strode toward Grace, his expression a thundercloud. I told you to stay inside, he said, his voice dangerously low. Caleb was hurt, she replied, refusing to be cowed. I couldn't just watch. You could have been killed. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm but not painful. "Do you understand that? These men wouldn't have hesitated to shoot you or worse." The genuine fear in his eyes surprised her. "I'm sorry if I frightened you, but I'm not sorry for helping." Something shifted in his expression then, anger giving way to a more complex emotion. "You're the most infuriating woman I've ever met," he muttered, releasing her shoulders. "And the bravest." Before she could respond, he turned to his men. "Tom, ride for the doctor and the sheriff. Everyone else, secure these vermin and tend to the wounded." In the aftermath, Grace helped where she could, cleaning and bandaging minor injuries while they waited for the doctor to arrive for Caleb. The sheriff and his deputies came as well, taking the rustlers into custody with promises of swift justice. It was late afternoon before things calmed enough for Grace to return to her interrupted chores. She was in the kitchen preparing supper when Lucas found her. "Caleb will be fine," he reported. "Doctor says it's a clean wound, should heal well with rest." "I'm glad to hear it." She continued kneading bread dough, not looking up. "And the rustlers, sheriff says they're part of the Dawson gang, been terrorizing ranches across 3 territories." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "They won't be troubling anyone else for a long while," Grace nodded, focusing on the rhythm of her hands against the dough. "Then I suppose it's safe for me to return to town now." A lengthy silence followed, broken only by the sound of the dough hitting the wooden board. Finally, Lucas spoke. "When I saw that rustler heading for you, I thought my heart would stop." She stilled her movements, but still didn't look up. "You said she's mine, did I?" His voice was soft, almost uncertain. "You did." Now she met his gaze. "What did you mean by that?" Lucas pushed away from the doorframe, crossing the kitchen until he stood directly before her. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. "It just came out." "I belong to no one, Lucas Lawson," she said firmly, though her pulse quickened at his proximity. "Not as a bride, not as an employee, not as anything else. I know that." He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, leaving a smudge of flour on her cheek. "You're the most independent woman I've ever known. It's unsettling." "Unsettling," she repeated, unsure if it was a compliment or criticism. "And fascinating." His hand lingered near her face. "Stay, Grace, not because you have to, but because you want to." The request hung between them, fraught with unspoken implications. "As your housekeeper, as whatever you want to be." He stepped back, giving her space. "I won't pressure you. The choice is yours, as it should be." With that, he left her alone with her thoughts and half-kneaded bread dough. That night, Grace lay awake long after the house had fallen silent, turning Lucas's words over in her mind. Stay. Such a simple word, yet so complicated in its meaning. She had come west seeking security through marriage to a stranger. Now another stranger was offering her. What exactly? Employment, certainly, but his eyes had suggested something more. She thought of Boston, of her uncle's coldness, of the limited prospects for a woman with no family connections or fortune. Then she thought of Arizona, wild, dangerous, but somehow more honest in its harshness. And she thought of Lucas, with his direct gaze and unexpected gentleness. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Lucas in the barn, checking on Caleb, who had been moved to a cot there for easier care. "I'll stay until Mrs. Diaz returns," she announced without preamble. "On one condition." Lucas straightened, his expression carefully neutral. "Name it." "I want to learn to shoot," she said, surprising even herself with the request. "If I'm to live in this territory, I should be able to defend myself and this ranch if needed." A slow smile spread across his face. "I think that can be arranged." Over the following weeks, a new routine established itself at the Lawson Ranch. Mornings were for household duties, afternoons for shooting practice under Lucas's patient instruction. Grace proved to be a quick study, her natural poise and steady hands making her a decent shot with the revolver he provided for her lessons. These sessions gradually became the highlight of her days, not just for the useful skills she was acquiring, but for the time spent in Lucas's company. Away from the demands of the ranch and the presence of the other hands, he revealed a different side of himself, thoughtful, occasionally humorous, and increasingly attentive to her comfort and interests. "You've got a good eye," he commented one afternoon as she hit the tin can target for the third time in succession. "Sure you never fired a gun before coming west?" Grace laughed, lowering the pistol. "Quite sure. My uncle would have been scandalized at the mere suggestion." "Tell me about him," Lucas said, leaning against the fence post. "You rarely speak of your life before." She hesitated, the familiar pain surfacing at the memories. "There isn't much to tell. After my parents died of influenza when I was 16, Uncle Gerald became my guardian. He made it quite clear that I was an unwelcome burden, though he was happy enough to use my mother's small inheritance for his business ventures." "Which explains why you answered Henderson's advertisement," Lucas observed. "Yes. When the money ran out, so did Uncle Gerald's tolerance. He arranged a marriage for me to a business associate, a man 3 times my age with a reputation for cruelty to his first 2 wives." She shuddered at the memory. The advertisement seemed like Providence by comparison. At least Mr. Henderson's letters were kind. Lucas's expression darkened. "Your uncle sounds like the sort of man who deserves a meeting with the business end of my fist." "He's not worth the effort," Grace replied, though touched by his indignation on her behalf. "What about your family?" "None to speak of," he said, his tone suggesting the subject was closed. Then, after a pause, "My mother died bringing me into this world. My father raised me alone until a mining accident took him when I was 12. Worked cattle drives after that, saved every penny until I could buy my first parcel of land." "You've built something remarkable," Grace said softly. "Your father would be proud." He looked at her then, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Maybe. He always said a ranch isn't a home without a family to fill it." The implication in his words hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Before Grace could respond, the sound of approaching hooves drew their attention. A wagon was coming up the drive, a woman at the reins. "Mrs. Diaz," Lucas identified the driver, surprise evident in his voice. "Wasn't expecting her back for at least another 2 weeks." Grace felt a curious mixture of disappointment and anxiety. Mrs. Diaz's return meant her position was no longer needed. Would Lucas still want her to stay without that practical reason? The housekeeper was a stout woman in her 50s, her weathered face creasing into a smile as she spotted Lucas. "Senor Lawson, my daughter is recovered sooner than expected. Thanks be to God, I come back to work now." "Welcome home, Mrs. Diaz," Lucas greeted her warmly. "We've missed your cooking." The woman's sharp eyes shifted to Grace, taking in the pistol still in her hand. "And who is this?" "Miss Gallagher has been keeping house in your absence," Lucas explained. "She's also becoming quite the markswoman." "Ah," Mrs. Diaz nodded, her expression speculative as she glanced between them. "Then I am perhaps not needed so urgently." "Nonsense," Grace said quickly. "I was only filling in temporarily. The position is rightfully yours." Later, as Grace helped Mrs. Diaz settle back into her quarters behind the kitchen, the older woman studied her thoughtfully. "Senor Lawson, he looks at you differently." "I don't know what you mean," Grace demurred, though heat rose in her cheeks. "I have worked for him 5 years. Never has he taught a woman to shoot. Never has he looked at anyone the way he looks at you." Mrs. Diaz folded her apron precisely. "He is a good man, but lonely. This ranch, it needs a mistress, not another housekeeper." Grace was saved from responding by a knock at the door. Lucas stood there, hat in hand. "Mrs. Diaz, would you mind if I borrow Miss Gallagher for a moment?" Outside, the setting sun bathed the ranch in golden light. Lucas led her to the porch, an unusual nervousness in his demeanor. "With Mrs. Diaz back, I understand if you want to leave," he began. "I'll take you to town whenever you're ready." Grace studied his face, reading the conflict there. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" "No," he said simply. "It's the last thing I want." "Then what do you want, Lucas?" He took a deep breath. "I want you to stay, not as my housekeeper, not as my employee." "As what then?" she pressed, needing to hear him say it. Lucas took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her skin. "When those rustlers came and I thought you might be hurt, I realized something. You came to Arizona to be a bride, and I'd like you to still become one." He squeezed her hands gently. "My bride, if you'll have me." Grace's heart pounded in her chest. "Lucas Lawson, are you proposing marriage to me?" Inelegantly, but yes. A hint of vulnerability showed in his eyes. "I know it's sudden. I know we're still learning each other, but I also know that I've never met anyone like you, Grace Gallagher. You're brave and kind and stubborn as the day is long. And I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stood in the dust of Apache Junction, looking like you might take on the whole territory single-handed." Grace couldn't help but laugh softly at his description. "You called me yours that day with the rustlers." "I meant it," he said solemnly. "Not as ownership, but as belonging, together." She looked out at the ranch, golden in the sunset light, and then back at the man before her, earnest, strong, and unexpectedly dear to her heart. "I came west seeking security," she said slowly. "I never expected to find something far more valuable." "And what's that?" he asked, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Partnership," she answered. "Respect, and yes, I believe love." She stepped closer to him. "Yes, Lucas, I'll stay as your bride." His face transformed with joy as he pulled her into his arms. The kiss they shared was gentle at first, then deepening with the promise of all that lay ahead. When they finally parted, Lucas pressed his forehead to hers. "I should warn you I'm stubborn too, and set in my ways after years alone." "I would expect nothing less," she replied with a smile. "We'll learn each other's ways together." Word of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Martha Wilson insisted on hosting a small celebration at her boarding house, where Grace was startled to discover how many friends she had made in her short time in Apache Junction. The town's residents had witnessed her arrival as a mail-order bride, and now celebrated her finding an unexpected happiness with one of their most respected ranchers. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony in the town's small church. Grace wore a dress of pale blue that Martha helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Lucas, uncommonly handsome in a new shirt and string tie, couldn't take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows before the traveling preacher. "I never thought I'd find someone who would see this land as I do," he told her as they rode back to the ranch that evening. "Someone who could appreciate its harshness and its beauty." "It grows on you," Grace admitted, looking out at the sunset painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "Like certain stubborn ranchers." Life as Mrs. Lawson was a far cry from what Grace had imagined when answering James Henderson's advertisement. Instead of being the wife of an aging rancher, she found herself the partner of a vital, passionate man in his prime, sharing his dreams and building a future together. The ranch flourished under their joint care. Grace brought her organizational skills to the business side of the operation, keeping meticulous records and suggesting improvements that increased their profits. Lucas, freed from paperwork he detested, focused on expanding their herd and improving their breeding stock. Mrs. Diaz remained with them, her role shifting to that of cook and surrogate mother to them both. She took particular delight in teaching Grace the secrets of Mexican cuisine, nodding approvingly as the younger woman mastered dishes that brought appreciative sounds from Lucas and the ranch hands at supper time. Their first challenge as a married couple came 6 months later, when a severe drought threatened the entire region. Waterholes dried up, grass withered, and ranchers began losing cattle at an alarming rate. Some gave up, selling what stock remained and moving on to more hospitable territories. "We could lose everything," Lucas admitted one night as they lay in bed, his voice tight with worry. "If the rains don't come soon." Grace turned to face him in the darkness. "Then we'll face that together. This isn't just your burden anymore, Lucas." The next morning, she rode out with him to inspect the most remote parts of their range, areas he'd been reluctant to show her due to the harsh conditions. What they found was grim cows too weak to stand, calves dying beside their mothers, waterholes nothing but cracked mud. "There's a spring-fed creek on the other side of that ridge," Lucas said, pointing to a distant rise. "On Davidson land, if we could drive the cattle there." "Have you spoken to Mr. Davidson?" Lucas shook his head. "Bad blood between our families. His father and mine had a dispute over boundaries 30 years ago. Davidsons don't forget easily." "Perhaps it's time for that to change," Grace suggested, "for both your sakes." The meeting with Howard Davidson was tense at first. The older rancher, widowed and with no sons to inherit, listened stonily as Lucas explained their situation. It was Grace who finally broke through his reserve. "Mr. Davidson, I understand there's history between your families," she said directly. "But surely that matters less than surviving this drought together. You have water, but your herd is smaller since the rustlers hit. We have cattle that need water and men who can help protect both our interests." Davidson's weathered face creased in reluctant admiration. "You've got a forthright wife, Lawson. She speaks her mind," Lucas agreed, a hint of pride in his voice. "And she's right." In the end, an agreement was reached. The Lawson cattle would have access to the Davidson Creek, and in return, Lucas's men would help patrol both properties. It was the beginning of an unlikely alliance that would serve both ranches well in the years to come. When the drought finally broke 2 months later, with thunderstorms that turned dry creek beds into raging torrents overnight, they had lost fewer cattle than most of their neighbors. The Lawson-Davidson cooperation became a model for other ranchers, changing the way business was done in their corner of the territory. Their personal life flourished alongside the ranch. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Grace discovered she was expecting a child. Lucas's joy was boundless. He insisted on building a proper nursery addition to their home and fretted over Grace's every movement, much to her amused exasperation. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain," she reminded him when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry to the line. "You're carrying the most precious cargo this ranch has ever produced," he countered, taking the basket from her hands. Their son, William Gerald Lawson, was born on a crisp December morning in 1883. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, and from his first wailing breath, it was clear he had inherited both their strong wills. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, cradling his son with hands that could break a wild horse but now touched the infant with infinite gentleness. "He is," Grace agreed, exhausted but radiant, and loud. I think the whole territory heard his arrival. "A proper rancher already," Lucas laughed, sitting beside her on the bed. "Grace, thank you for coming west, for staying, for giving me a family." She reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. "Thank you for claiming me as yours before I ever left town." The years that followed brought prosperity and challenges in equal measure. The ranch expanded as Lucas acquired adjacent properties from neighbors who decided to move on. Grace's innovative ideas, including breeding programs that produced hardier cattle and more efficient range management, earned them a reputation for progressive ranching throughout the Arizona territory. Their family grew as well. A daughter, Elizabeth Martha, joined them 2 years after William, followed by twins Robert and James 3 years later. The house expanded accordingly, with Lucas adding rooms and eventually a second story to accommodate their growing brood. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Lucas surprised Grace with a trip to San Francisco, her first journey away from the ranch since their marriage. They left the children in Mrs. Diaz's capable hands and traveled by train, enjoying the novel experience of having time alone together. In their hotel suite overlooking the bay, Lucas presented her with a velvet box containing a sapphire pendant. "To match your eyes," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "and to thank you for these 10 years. Grace touched the stone, deeply moved. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a home when I had nothing." "You had everything I needed," Lucas corrected, drawing her into his arms. "Courage, intelligence, and a heart big enough to love an ornery rancher and his wild land." "Speaking of wild land," Grace said, a spark of excitement in her eyes, "I've been corresponding with a botanist from the university about drought-resistant grasses we might introduce on the ranch. He's agreed to visit next month." Lucas laughed, shaking his head fondly. Most wives would be thinking about new dresses or furniture on their anniversary trip. Mine is plotting agricultural innovations. "Are you complaining, Mr. Lawson?" she teased, winding her arms around his neck. "Not even slightly, Mrs. Lawson." His kiss was as passionate as it had been on their wedding day. 10 years and 4 children having done nothing to diminish their desire for each other. Later, as they stood on their hotel balcony watching the sunset paint the Golden Gate in shades of amber and rose, Lucas wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Coming west, marrying me instead of returning to Boston?" Grace leaned back against his solid warmth, considering the question seriously. "I think about how differently my life might have gone," she admitted. "If James Henderson hadn't died, if I'd found a way to return east, if I hadn't accepted your offer of employment. And," he prompted when she fell silent, "and I can't imagine any path that would have brought me greater happiness than the one I chose." She turned in his arms to face him. "I came seeking security and found love instead. How could I ever regret that?" On their return to the ranch, they found changes already in motion. Howard Davidson, now in his 70s and increasingly frail, had made a decision. Having no children of his own, he proposed to sell his ranch to Lucas and Grace, with the condition that he remain in his home until his passing. "I've watched how you two built something special," the old man told them. "Turned enemies into allies, made the land better than you found it. I want my place to go to folks who'll care for it proper." The acquisition doubled the size of their holdings, creating the largest and most successful ranch in the county. With it came new responsibilities and challenges, but also opportunities to implement Grace's forward-thinking ideas on a larger scale. By 1895, the Lawson Ranch had become a stopping point for agricultural researchers and progressive ranchers from across the West, all eager to see the methods that allowed the operation to thrive even in the harshest conditions. Grace, now widely published in agricultural journals under her own name, was as much the face of the business as Lucas. William, at 12, was already showing his father's affinity for horsemanship and his mother's head for figures. Elizabeth had inherited Grace's compassion and organizational skills, often helping Mrs. Diaz manage the expanded household. The twins, at 7, were bundles of energy who seemed to be everywhere at once, equally at home in the saddle or helping with ranch chores. On a warm evening in May, as they sat on their expanded porch watching their children play in the yard, Lucas took Grace's hand, his expression contemplative. "Remember that first day in Apache Junction, when I called you Henderson's mail-order bride?" Grace smiled at the memory. "And how scandalized Martha Wilson was at your lack of tact." "I knew right then," he said, his voice low and certain. "Something about you called to me, watching you stand there, trying so hard to be brave when your whole world had just fallen apart." "I certainly didn't know," Grace laughed. "I thought you were the most presumptuous man I'd ever met." "I was," he agreed easily, "offering a lady employment as a housekeeper within minutes of meeting her." "The best offer I ever accepted," she said softly, leaning against his shoulder, "though I had no idea where it would lead." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. "When I called you mine during that fight with the rustlers, I meant it. Not the way a man owns cattle or land, but the way a heart recognizes its other half." "I know," Grace said, watching as William hoisted one of the twins onto his shoulders, their laughter carrying across the yard. "And I'm grateful every day that you saw something in me worth claiming." The Lawson legacy continued to grow and flourish over the following decades. William eventually took over the daily management of the ranch operations, implementing his own innovations while respecting the foundation his parents had built. Elizabeth, after attending college in California, an opportunity Grace had insisted on for her daughter, returned to Apache Junction as the town's first female physician. The twins found their separate paths, Robert as a lawyer who helped many ranchers navigate the increasingly complex legal landscape of the new century, and James as a rancher in his own right on land adjoining the family property. Grace and Lucas gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, but remained the heart of the family and the community. Their partnership became legendary in the territory: the mail-order bride, who never reached her intended husband, and the cowboy who claimed her as his own before she ever left town. In 1921, on their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends from across the state of Arizona, no longer a territory but a proper state for nearly a decade, they renewed the vows they had spoken in that small church all those years ago. "I, Lucas, take you, Grace," he said, his voice still strong though his hair had long since turned silver, "as my partner in all things, today and always." "I, Grace, take you, Lucas," she responded, the years having only deepened her love for this man, "as my home and my heart's true north, today and always." As the celebration continued around them, they slipped away to the porch of the home they had built together, watching the sunset paint the land they both loved in gold and crimson. "Was it everything you hoped for?" Lucas asked, his arm around her shoulders. "This life we made?" Grace smiled up at him, the years having etched lines of laughter and wisdom around her still bright eyes. "It was nothing I could have imagined," she answered truthfully, "and everything I could have wished for." In the distance, the Superstition Mountains stood unchanged, witnessing another day's end on the ranch that had grown from one man's dream into a family's enduring legacy. The unlikely love that had bloomed between a Boston lady and an Arizona rancher had not only transformed their own lives, but had shaped the very land around them, creating something that would outlast them both. And it had all begun with a letter, a stage-coach journey, and a bold claim spoken in the dust of a frontier town. "She's mine."